to the foxhole at Foxxo Esoterica. I promise I was sober when I wrote this. Hello, dear guest, and welcome back to the foxhole. And should I say welcome to my first foray into showing my face for Foxxo Esoterica work. Unfortunately, it is an inferior version of my face because I had to shave for work. It's not just like a random aesthetic change. I'm mixing up the vibe. I actually had to shave for work because I'm working at a theme park called Movie Park in Germany where I will be playing Charlie Chaplin in the late spring. But Charlie Chaplin has the sort of mustache that people don't usually get away with having if they walk around in public with Germany. So I elected to use a prosthetic and in the meantime, deal with all of this. But you know what? This is too much of a tangent. Let's just do a little slow fade with some scenery. Get into something a little bit more descriptive, shall we? And look at that. The audio quality's better too. I'm doing too many actual bits and too little actual explaining. To those who have followed this little project, I bet you're surprised to see that I've added a video component to things. Indeed, what was once a paranormal drunk comedy podcast is pivoting away from a sheer podcast format and more towards a video format. There are several reasons for this. 1. I find that the main draw towards me doing a podcast originally was getting drunk with friends and doing silly little stories. But now that I've moved across the pond to Germany, that's become a tad bit trickier. And while I do enjoy telling stories and doing the research, I find that doing solo recordings on a tight deadline is a tad bit oppressive, and that loosely producing higher quality content, a higher quality in as much as this video such and such takes longer to produce, I will still be cutting corners and refusing to purchase equipment if it costs more than $50, over. On a blase schedule seems more fun in regards to a personal project. 2. While ghost stories and tales of the paranormal are certainly going to be the niche I focus on more often than not, doing the truffle topic and just kind of living life and ... watching my brother's videos on random topics, check out Bralix, he does his own thing and it's remarkable, made me realize something. I want to talk about more things. I want to talk about roller coasters and fungi and maybe even media and the random niche interests in my life. And if I do that on a podcast, it would all seem a bit aimless and without a coherent theme. But when you put the effort into producing a video, people tend to push that thought aside. So while you're certainly looking at the title of this video and thinking to yourself, yes, the Codex Gigas, that fits the theme, do be warned, my urge to branch out is becoming less and less easy to suppress. 2.5. That being said, I will still try to extract audio from these little projects and produce them as a podcast. But this will come at the cost of a consistent schedule. 2.75. I'm kind of forsaking the traditional cold open to explain this sudden pivot in my creative process, aren't I? It's not very common where I forego my urge to say foxy things and be a little fox. So, I can see you looking at the title of the video, probably thinking to yourself, yeah, he's really committed to just recording this on his phone, isn't he? To those who know what the Codex Gigas is, this part will seem superfluous. But to those looking at the title and going, those are certainly a couple of words. They kind of don't mean anything to me personally. Tonight's encyclopedic collection, in which I shall be deriving the story from, is the Folked Up collection, the companion compendium to the Urumabu Phantasma franchise. In addition to, well, the book itself, the Codex Gigas. Is it an encyclopedia? Is it a cursed object? Pause on, experimentation will discern. It's dawning on me that I'm going to need to rework the encyclopedic collection bit of this, like for the non-ghost story content I want to do. Like, for example, creature coasters for the coaster content, workshopping it. It's also dawning on me that it's very likely that I'm going to be making 2 videos and I'm going to be using the same footage for both of them. Because I want to have the YouTube introduction video be all of this explanation stuff, and I do not want to record it more than once. But indeed, back to the topic at hand. The Codex is a very real book, and I lied earlier. I did not read it. But before I continue to not read it, let's talk about our potion brew this evening. Tonight I have Cabana Energy Fruchtvine Cocktail because it's horrifying, and it was €1.30. You know what? Also for posterity, I've already cracked this open, so I've had it. But for German episode, we're doing Waldgesell Kräuterlicher, which is like Jaeger, but cheaper. Pretty good. Do not have to try hard to make Jaeger things taste good. Well, let's try this out. Stupid and I'm dumb. Prost. You know, I don't like it, but like, because it's like sweet and alcohol, and there's not like anything to it. It's just like, yep, we're drinking a fruity alcohol beverage. This has been Foxxo Esoterica ad-lib. Oh, you know what? I had a cute little bit in here earlier. This is what I get for improvising a thing I can only do once. If I make a mistake, I have to commit to it. But in the script, I said, before I continue to not read it, allow me to talk about my potion brewed. I talked about being horny for fungi in the last podcast episode. I'm not particularly interested in making monetizable content. This alcohol that I'm putting into my mouth for YouTube is Cabana Energy Fruchtvine Cocktail. I got it because it's red, like the Devil's Bible. Oh, I guess that's a good segue, because I didn't drop that yet.
So, a cursed book is the main entree for tonight's creepy one-course service, eh, Forseti? I don't know, Fox. Seems a little bit Death Note-y to me, and I don't think the Death Note is real. Rest assured, dear listener, the Death Note is very real. But so is the Codex Gigas. Latin for giant book, that kind of makes it sound less menacing. As well as the Devil's Bible, that's much better. This unusually large manuscript of the Vulgate Bible, the 4th century Latin edition of the Holy Text, was believed to have been written in the 13th century. The last records within the text bear the date 1222. The Codex was also believed to have been written by an enigmatic monk with the equally enigmatic nomener of Herman the Recluse, who resided at a Benedictine monastery known as Podlazice, I think. Here's the spelling. In the Kingdom of Bohemia. Should one make their way to that location in contemporary times, they'd find themselves in the town of Krast in the Czech Republic. Back to Herman, though. One does not gain titles at the end of their name through mundane monk work alone. And it is the writing of the Codex Gigas that serves as the main folkloric keystone in this story. Because, despite his reclusive nature, Herman did not write the Codex alone. According to legend, that is. Allegedly, Herman the Recluse broke a monastic vow. Which specific vow? Well, that's lost to history. But as punishment, the elder monks and abbots decided to trap Herman behind a paved wall and starve him to death. This practice, known as immurement, is actually anything but fictional, unfortunately. And in the case of Herman, he'd do anything to avoid such a fate. Equally unfortunately, Herman's first offer was a bit of a stretch in regards to achievable goals. He offered to write a tome that contained all of Earth's knowledge. Some stories say that he was given a year to complete such a task. Others claim that he was given a single night. Either way, an unnamed abbot agreed. Ultimately, this is the sort of task that would take a lifetime to complete, and the abbot was most certainly going to get to scratch his immurement itch. Despite this, though, Herman wrote, and he wrote, and he wrote, and wrote, and wrote, and was nowhere near finishing by the time that the day/year deadline approached. Drastic measures would need to be taken. According to legend, Herman the Recluse summoned the devil himself to help him finish the Codex Gigas before the abbot executed him. In exchange for his immortal soul, of course. And the devil, being a prolific soul collector, agreed. No one knows what became of Herman the Recluse after that fateful exchange, but what is known is the fact that the Codex Gigas was indeed written
a fully fledged and fundamentally filled out book, which currently sits in the National Library of Stockholm in Sweden to this day. And yes, this does seem like a good point in time to get into the sources, but I'd hate to leave one thing unaddressed. The whole Satan thing seems a bit silly, right? Seems a bit, I don't know, Satan might not be real, feels a little, why would Satan write a Bible, right? As it turns out though, the very real Codex Gigas is absolutely filled with strange additions and illustrations, namely, a massive portrait of Satan himself, sitting on a throne and taking up the entire page.
Ooh, it's getting darker. Time passes. Ooh. But yes, to the sources. Ooh, you can see the reflection of the computer in my glasses, so it doesn't feel weird when you can obviously tell I'm reading from a script and not memorizing this part. I'll be using Wikipedia first off. I will also be using the National Library of Sweden's website, in as much as they posted scans of the Codex Gigas online, but considering I don't know how to read Latin, I will not be using it as much as I'd like to. Specifically, there's a link to the World Digital Library on that website. Atlas Obscura is always a helpful source, so I'd like to shout out Ella Morton's article, Object of Intrigue, the Devil's Bible. But there's also another article on this site simply titled Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible, written by user Whiskey55. I also used the article Visiting the Codex Gigas, Devil's Bible, at the National Library of Sweden, written on a podcast, A Strong Sense of Places website. That's a weird sentence grammatically on my part. And lastly, I used a paper written by Camille Bolden and Janolik Marek titled The Devil's Bible in Sweden. So I know the satanic such and such sounds interesting, but what if I talked about numbers and measurements and dates first? This isn't a conversation. I'm going to be doing it regardless of your answer at home.
Among other reasons, the Codex is really bizarre in how large it is. The book is 92 centimeters long, pretty much 3 feet exactly, and 50 centimeters wide, almost, but not quite 2 feet. It is also a hefty text, weighing about 75 kilograms, or 165 pounds. Almost as heavy as the textbooks I had in college. Just kidding, I'm an actor. I got to just buy scripts and small novels. Moving on though. As mentioned before, the contents of the Codex include the aforementioned Vulgate Bible, both the Old and the New Testaments, but there are a few other features in the Codex as well. One can read up on Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews, a 20-volume history of the Jewish people, once written in Greek, in this case, written in Latin. Actually, side note, everything in this book is Latin. One can also find the De Bellio Iudacio, also written by Josephus, which specifically details the 1st century CE Jewish-Roman wars, as well as Isidore of Seville's Encyclopedia of Etymology, titled Etymology, but with an IE at the end, as well as medieval medical text, the Ars Medicae, as well as the historical account of Prague-born priest Cosmas of Prague, as well as 2 texts by writer Constantine the African, who wasn't actually African, but learned a lot about medicine in the Arabian Peninsula, and also contains a brief chronicle of Bohemia, and also contains a brief chronicle of the monastery, and also contains a calendar. The book also contains a vast wealth of illustrations, both full-page as well as text embellishments.
Keep all of this in mind when I tell you that regardless of the book's origin story's authenticity, the text was definitely written in a single person's handwriting, meaning that all of that was recorded by a single individual. The Library of Sweden puts this in perspective in a quote. Quote,
"If the scribe worked for 6 hours a day and wrote 6 days a week, this means that the manuscript could have taken about 5 years to complete. If the scribe was also a monk, he may only have been able to work for about 3 hours a day, and this means that the manuscript could have taken 10 years to write. As the scribe may also have ruled the lines to guide the writing before he began to write, it probably took several hours to rule 1 leaf. This extends the period it took to complete the manuscript. The scribe also decorated the manuscript, so this all means that the manuscript probably took at least 20 years to finish, and could have even taken 30.
Probably. And this is just me spitballing, but I don't think that you could get that all down in one night.
Other Codex Gigas fun facts include the fact that it is the largest surviving medieval text to this day, both in terms of weight and length. The Codex also only contains 310 leaves, 620 pages, though they are indeed massive pages. The book weighs more than I do. Instead of normal plant paper, the Devil's Bible was written on material known as vellum, which is made from cattle or donkey skin membrane. We also know that around 12 sheets have been removed, and that one of them contained the very first part of the book of Genesis. Those have never surfaced. The book is also bound in hard wood, though it was rebound in 1697 after it fell out of a window. I'd say something like, more on that later, but the next section of the script conveniently actually contains the details of that particular historical anecdote. So it's history time.
So, Herman the Recluse may or may not have been real, though we do know, maybe, that someone by the name of Hermanus Inclusus put his name in the book. It's up to debate as to the authenticity, but the name translates into Herman the Recluse. Maybe. I don't speak Latin. But what we do know is that the Bohemian monastery fucking dying on my saliva and washing it down with more liquid because I'm smart, parentheses, Papazice, that once housed the book was real and was destroyed in the early 1400s during the Hussite Wars, where an anti-Roman Catholic Hussites of Bohemia came up with what is referred to as proto-Protestantism. Protestantism before it was cool. We don't need the German Martin Luther to nail any silly old thesis anywhere 100 years later to know that Catholics are kinda sus.
As a result, though, the Hussites were notorious monastery haters and burned down a lot of them. The Catholics, on the other hand, borrowed friends from all over Europe, so they did not lose that little skirmish, though it did last for 20 years. However, the Codex Gigas had a habit of getting pawned off to and displayed at almost a half dozen different Czech monasteries, so it managed to avoid the brunt of the conflict, until Emperor Rudolf II of the Holy Roman Empire decided to purchase it for himself in 1594. As a result, when the 30 Years' War showed up, the Protestant Frederick V of the Palatinate replaced a Catholic guy as King of Bohemia, they decided to go to war for 30 years over it. One of the Protestants' allies was the Kingdom of Sweden, ruled by Gustavus Adolphus, who did so well at the war that he managed to snatch a majority of the Holy Roman Emperor's library as spoils of the war, including the Codex Gigas. As a result, the Devil's Bible stayed in Sweden for the remainder of its life, up until 2007, when Sweden loaned the book to the National Library of the Czech Republic for a year, as a little treat, before taking it back, where it remains on display to this day. Except not in 2022 because they're doing extensive renovation work on it at the moment.
Also, one fun fact, tying up that aforementioned loose end I was talking about, the Devil's Bible was being held at the Swedish fort known as Tre Kronor in Stockholm in 1697. Which just so happened to be the year that a massive fire broke out in the castle, prompting the history preservers to throw books out of the window in order to keep it safe from the flames, including the Devil's Bible. According to records, this very much injured an unsuspecting pedestrian. And also, I've been doing bits, but I do know that the Devil's Bible did end up doing a little bit of travel. I know on exhibitions it's made its way to the States and on the European circuit, but, it's not that important, but I kind of wanted to just, remain factually authentic, I guess. But all of that is pretty mundane and not very satanic, even though all of that constitutes the history that we actually 100% know is real. What other weird, scary, borderline supernatural things do people associate this book with? Well,
perhaps I'm starting off a bit mundane here, but the large imposing illustration of Satan, coupled with the anonymous authorship, probably serve as the main backbone of the whole selling your soul to the devil legend. Though, no one really knows when that particular tale first popped up. It is noticeably not a part of the monastery's history section, but also the book is written in Latin, so I can't really double check. The legend may not have been conceived of whole cloth, though, when one considers this next, semi-intriguing, hopefully not mundane anecdote. The more that historical preservation experts looked at the Devil's Bible in regards to handwriting, the consistent style, the similarities of illustrations, etc., it is very easy to conclude that the entire book was, indeed, written by only one person. And that is something that I've already said in this piece. But what I didn't mention is the fact that many historians have been unable to find a degradation in the writing quality of the book, something perceived in other massive monk-written manuscripts that took years to write. It was common that monks got carpal tunnel / arthritis / whatever often, and age itself made writing hard, so a lot of medieval manuscripts showcase that in their writing towards the end. This isn't a feature of the Codex Gigas. It simply does not show any sign of age in its writing, indicating that the book may have actually been written within a short period of time, despite the fact that something like that would have probably taken decades, according to the National Library of Sweden. Also interesting is the fact that the entire page before the Satan illustration is dedicated to the confession of the author's own sins. Maybe. I don't know if I mentioned it, but I don't read Latin, so I can't double check. The author doesn't talk about having sold his soul or anything of that, and instead just kind of runs down the whole gamut of the 7 deadly sins. At least I think, it's in Latin. But either way, that's a really weird inclusion to an all-encompassing text. ... Except not really. A lot of times monks use the practice of writing for years to atone for sins, I guess. This isn't that abnormal.
The Codex Gigas may actually be also haunted unto itself. There are a good handful of stories, admittedly coming out of specifically the 19th century, but they do involve people reporting supernatural such and such going on while in the presence of the book. This is burning my hands.
According to a few anecdotes I found online, an 1858 book titled Preposterous Anecdotes details a Swedish guard getting accidentally locked inside of the Royal Library, only then to discover a veritable storm of books dancing and flying around the room, led by the Devil's Bible itself, prompting the guard to hide under a table for the entire night and potentially go mad in the process. This next anecdote involves a name. A librarian by the name of August Strindberg worked in the Royal Library in the 1870s and would claim to hear disembodied voices whenever he opened the codex to show guests. Other articles detail an almost obsessive-like quality to the librarian and tell accounts of his addiction to opening the book and hearing the voices, trying to bring as many guests as possible for overnight reading sessions in order to share the demonic wealth of knowledge. I think this here is a picture of August Strindberg, though I don't know for certain. I can't read Latin. Far more apocryphal than the first two arguably apocryphal anecdotes, the paper written by Camille Bolden and Janolich Marek involves stories of people seeing the devil himself reading the Codex Gigas a day before something terrible happens in Sweden. The specific example listed involves people seeing Satan in the library the night before the death of King Charles John in 1844, casually reading his own book.
Piggybacking off of that paper that I saw, I kind of found it late into my research, so forgive me if this section is a little bit out of order. The paper mentions that the selling your soul to the devil origin story was well established in the Codex's lore before the Swedish army took the Codex in the 30-Year War, even though the Royal Library wouldn't write about it itself until the 1800s. The only thing that may or may not have been added during the book's stay in Sweden is the monk's threat of immurement. Another thread of the story also sort of popped up during the 30 Years' War, wherein Herman was actually cursed by the devil upon completion of the book. The exact nature of the curse made it so that Herman couldn't stay in one place for longer than a night, so that he would spend years on the run, lest an unknown horrible consequence befall him. The story does end, however, with Herman going for the Hail Mary. Literally. He knelt before a statue of Virgin Mary and begged to be released from his curse, whereupon he died, but he would ascend to heaven after all. The Codex Gigas' current location at the National Library is a park in the Östermalm district of Stockholm known as Humlegården. And I did a bit of digging around to see if there were any hauntings in that area that, while not being directly attributed to the Devil's Bible, may occur in its vicinity. I couldn't find anything online except for the fact that the park is a location for a haunted city exploration game, according to TripAdvisor, so woo!
Oh goodness, that was a bit of a quick one, wasn't it? It does not bode well for me concluding that this is an actual haunted artifact. But it does mean that I don't have to spend too much time editing my first video project. But yes, I don't think that this book is haunted, nor do I believe that it was written by the devil. I kind of maybe don't believe that Satan exists. That feels like, a Christian belief. So it's a bit hard for a single book to change my mind on that matter. Though I am really glad to have looked into the story a bit, because the Codex Gigas is a fascinating piece of art that, if it was indeed written by a single person in a short period of time, is an incredible project done by someone with an immense amount of skill, even if that skill was used to atone for self-perceived sins in the most dramatic, extra method possible, save for actually getting put behind a wall and starving to death.
And you know what? I don't think that the monk behind this project was threatened with any execution. I think he just did this as a self-imposed monastic punishment, sort of. And he was just, talented. And indeed, the giant picture of Satan is weird, but it's kind of the only actual satanic adjacent illustration in the text. And it does seem to be composed with period-appropriate symbolism, such as a forked tongue indicating deceit, and a juxtaposed position to the illustration of the kingdom of heaven that shows the devil in direct opposition. This all tracks. It's not a Satan-worshipping thing. Not that I'm a religious symbolism scholar, but I'll even go so far as to say that I think that the name Herman was real. I don't know why he'd make that up.
As for the haunted Swedish tales, I can be proven wrong if more show up in the research, but there is just too small a pool of paranormal anecdotes that take place in such a specific time frame without occurring at all in the 1900s for me to cry ghost. Especially considering that so many people spend their time around the book nowadays, you'd think that somebody would write an article about it, but none have really showed up.
Well, that was fun, wasn't it? I sure hope so. I'm only in the script writing part of this process, and I haven't done any editing yet. But that should be fun and easy. I still haven't done it at this point. But anyway, let's get to the review corner.
Daria McCarthy writes, amazing library with lots of reference books and materials, old newspapers, and the like. Many records and some rare books/manuscripts as well. Well worth a visit just to look around, but many people seem to be studying as well. You can't take in outside bags and coats, but they have free lockers and a clear plastic bag to take your stuff in. They've also got the Devil's Bible on display, and you can learn about that too. 5 stars. I kind of get the vibe that the Devil's Bible was the main draw of that library, but I'm glad that the layman has also had that take in, Google Maps reviews, in addition to the article writers and such. H. Lee writes, an interesting place to visit if one is around the area. A library that extends below ground level where they store physical copies of every single book, film, and media published in Sweden. I kind of saw this in pictures, but yeah, the library is sort of built underground. Interesting. 5 stars. Topaz Gross writes, I do not read in Swedish, so I cannot testify about the nature of the books, but the library itself, as a place, working, studying, or just resting at the end of the day, with a good book, is wonderful. Bruh, me with Latin for real. 5 stars. Pavel Buska writes, the Devil's Bible, Codex Gigas, from Czech Kingdom, the greatest manuscript of the world, was stolen in 1648 in Prague. 5 stars. No, yeah, they should actually probably bring that back, not just as a one-time thing. I mean, I guess they're doing preservation work at the moment, but yeah, that's Czechs.
I suppose that'll wrap up this video/podcast. Leave a comment if you have any particular opinions on it one way or another, though I do feel pretty stalwart in continuing down this trajectory. Let's see if I have this memorized still. You'll primarily find this on YouTube because it's a video, but when I upload the audio format, it'll be on Anchor, Breaker, Google Podcasts, Pocket Play, Radio Public, Spotify. Fuck, what was the last one? But you know what? It'll be in the description too, so forgive me. You can follow me at twitter.com. If I decide to still tweet, still up in the air about that, at FORSETIFOX. And you can also find me at TikTok at FORSYFOX. We are currently not undergoing a TikTok ban in Germany, so I think I'll still have my account, even though I originally made it in America. Thank you so much to Sunel Chiquito for the artwork. You can thank me because I did every other part of this podcast, the editing, and also the music and the research and the editing. You know what I forgot to do? I forgot to plug my coffee and my Patreon at FORSETIFOX. But that'll wrap up this episode. Sorry I didn't think that this one was really haunted, everybody. I'm usually not the skeptic, but I gotta say, no ghosts here. I'm still gonna have sex with the book, though.